You need to hear this clearly. The moment Isaiah Chance walked through those prison gates, 6 Block was already waiting for him. The man who helped coordinate the murder of Charles Jones, known as Julio Foolio. The man spent months on an ankle monitor while investigators tracked his movements. The same man whose own mother took the witness stand and described him as quiet, reserved, and helpful at home stepped onto that prison block and immediately had any sense of protection stripped away. On day 1, within the first hours, he had hands on him before he even knew which unit he had been assigned to. Here is a reality that demands attention. He was never built for what came next. His own defense attorney stood before the jury and stated plainly that Isaiah Chance was an aspiring rapper with no gang tattoos, no documented gang affiliation, and no weapons traced back to him. The defense essentially pleaded with 12 strangers to see him as an ordinary young man who fell in with the wrong people at the wrong time. That was the strategy. The very people hired to present him as hardened and street-connected could not sustain that narrative. They abandoned the gang persona entirely and reframed him as a misguided kid. The jury rejected that argument. He was still convicted of first-degree murder, still facing the possibility of the death penalty, and still had his world permanently altered on his first day inside. To fully understand how extreme the situation is, we have to go back. This story is not simply about one man getting attacked. It is about a carefully constructed persona being stripped away layer by layer until nothing remained except a frightened defendant in a courtroom facing the possibility of death. Every piece of it matters, and every part connects. To see how it reached this point, we need to return to Jacksonville, Florida, one of the most volatile conflict zones in the South. For more than a decade, Jacksonville streets have been marked by a violent gang war that much of the country ignored, until Foolio's name began gaining national attention. On one side stood 6 Block, also known as KTA, short for Kill Them All. It was Foolio's crew, central to his identity, his music catalog, his online presence, every diss track, and every memorial post. Charles Jones was not merely associated with that movement, he was one of its most visible figures. Detectives testified that he operated as a high-ranking leader within 6 Block, holding a position comparable to how young Ace was viewed at the top of ATK on the opposing side. Across from them was ATK, Ace's top killers, along with their allies, a group known as 1200. This was not a sudden dispute sparked by a lyric or social media exchange. Investigators reference homicides dating back to 2018, along with multiple shootings and retaliatory killings that left casualties on both sides. The conflict was entrenched, violent, and active long before Foolio ever reached 1 million listeners on Spotify. It was within that ongoing war that Isaiah Chance entered the picture. At 23 years old at the time of trial, he was publicly described as a member of ATK. Prosecutors laid out what they described as his documented connections, phone records, social media activity, and even a recorded Twitter Spaces dispute between him and Foolio that detective preserved as evidence because it demonstrated direct, traceable tension in the months leading up to the murder. There was also a live online argument between Isaiah Chance and Charles Jones, publicly broadcast and later entered into evidence. The Jacksonville Sheriff's Office gang unit had already been monitoring the exchanges. Investigators were aware of the hostility between them well before the shooting occurred, however. That narrative clashed sharply with what his defense presented in court. His own attorney, the man tasked with saving his life, stood before the jury and argued that Isaiah Chance had no verified gang affiliation. None of the recovered firearms were traced back to him. None of the clothing tied to the shooting was linked to him. He did not meet the legal criteria for documented gang membership, and he did not bear the tattoos typically used to establish that status. The arresting JSO officer had not formally classified him as a gang member. During the penalty phase, when the possibility of a death sentence was real, his mother testified on his behalf. She described him as caring and reserved and stated that she had never seen him involved in gang activity or handling weapons. She told the court she once sought speech therapy for him because he did not begin speaking until he was 4 or 5 years old. One of his father figures testified that Chance had spoken about becoming a merchant mariner, traveling, and building a life with direction and purpose. To be clear, this is not an argument in defense of a man convicted of first-degree murder. The jury heard all that testimony and still returned a guilty verdict. He is guilty. What stands out, however, is that he constructed his identity in the shadow of a gang war he was not fundamentally prepared to navigate. He was not the gunman. He did not pull the trigger. He served as a locator. He was the eyes. He was the individual in the silver Chevrolet Cruze moving through Tampa nightclubs around midnight, stepping out at 2 separate locations, lifting his phone, and transmitting the location of Foolio's vehicle to the shooters. That was his function. He operated as a spotter, the locate, the digital scout for a murder he helped coordinate but did not personally carry out. That role alone reveals a distinction between image and reality in Isaiah Chance's case. To understand the weight of it, consider how June 23rd, 2024 unfolded, because every detail of that night is significant. Foolio had turned 26 on June 21st, just 2 days before his death. On the morning before the shooting, he posted on X, expressing gratitude for seeing another year of life. It was a public acknowledgement of survival in an environment where longevity was never guaranteed. On June 14th, 9 days before the attack, he promoted his birthday celebration in Tampa through Instagram flyers and announced that he had rented an Airbnb. In effect, he shared his location with anyone paying attention. According to prosecutors, that June 14th post marked the beginning of a coordinated plan. They argued that the 4 defendants saw the announcement and began organizing the murder from that point forward. This was not a spontaneous act. They had 9 days to prepare, gather weapons, and coordinate travel. They drove from Jacksonville to Tampa the day before the shooting and were already in the city on June 22nd, positioned. These dudes checked in, settled down, and stayed ready. Then on the night of June 23rd, Theo and everybody with him were moving all across the city. Strip clubs, a gentleman's club called Teasers, and then another location after that. He was outside enjoying himself during his birthday weekend, completely unaware of what was unfolding around him. And during that entire night, the entire time, Isaiah Chance and his girlfriend Alicia Andrews were lurking nearby inside a silver Chevrolet Cruze, quietly trailing the convoy through Tampa. Surveillance cameras later showed them appearing at 2 completely different clubs at the exact same moments Theo and his crew arrived there. During closing arguments, the state attorney made it crystal clear. They never walked up to security. They never tried to enter the clubs. They were not there to have fun or party. Their only job was to track, monitor, and report locations. Riding behind them in a second vehicle, a Chevrolet Impala, were the actual shooters. Sean Gathright, just 20 years old, along with Davian Murphy, 29, and Rashad Murphy, 32. 3 men armed with 2 AR-style rifles and a Glock pistol equipped with an extended, high-capacity magazine. At some point later that night, Theo ended up getting kicked out of the Airbnb because there were simply too many people there. After that, he attempted to get a room at the Home 2 Suites near the University of South Florida on McKinley Drive. That hotel parking lot became the scene where everything finally came crashing down. Prosecutors say Chance stepped out of the vehicle, placed a phone call, and moments later the Impala pulled in. The surveillance footage from that hotel was something the jury reportedly had to sit through carefully because of how disturbing and calculated it looked. The gunman, Gathright, and the Murphy brothers climbed out wearing masks and immediately started firing without hesitation. Investigators recovered 31 separate 9mm shell casing from the scene. The rifles were fitted with brass catches, devices specifically designed to trap spent shell casing so forensic investigators would have less evidence to work with afterwards. These were not reckless amateurs acting on impulse. According to prosecutors, this was a carefully organized and fully premeditated execution. Surveillance footage showed the attackers circling Theo's vehicle twice before finally opening fire. The car attempted to speed away from the ambush, but one of the suspects continued unloading rounds from a rifle directly into the vehicle as it tried escaping the parking lot. The vehicle was later discovered completely shredded with bullet holes from multiple angles. Charles Jones suffered devastating injuries after being shot in the heart, lungs, and even the aorta. He was pronounced dead at the scene. 3 other individuals were wounded. After the shooting, the group dispersed. Isaiah Chance, Alicia Andrews, and Rashad Murphy took an Uber back to Jacksonville. License plate reader data captured Davion Murphy leaving Tampa in the Chevrolet Cruze, while Sean Gathright drove the Impala out of the area. Within days, investigators began closing in. Chance was still wearing an ankle monitor from an unrelated case. He was electronically tracked. When detectives arrived at a residence on Captiva Bluff Road in Jacksonville to arrest him, they had to surround the property, identify themselves, and issue command for approximately 15 to 20 minutes before Chance and Andrews finally exited the home. He remained inside until it was clear there was no alternative. According to court documents, Chance told a Jacksonville Sheriff's Office detective that once he was free of the ankle monitor, he intended to leave the state and never be seen again. That statement carries weight. A man publicly associated with ATK, accused of helping coordinate the killing of one of Jacksonville's most visible rappers, expressed a desire to disappear. He did not speak about loyalty or solidarity. He spoke about fleeing. After participating in the planning of a birthday ambush, his next plan was to run. That contrast between image and reaction is significant. The defendant's conduct throughout the legal proceedings further revealed their character. Consider Sean Gathright, who was 18 years old at the time of his arrest. Prosecutors identified him as one of the shooters. Surveillance footage from the hotel parking lot showed him among the masked gunmen. Forensic testing linked Gathright's firearm and ammunition to the crime scene and to prior violent incidents, including an October 2023 attempt on Foolio's life and an unrelated 2022 homicide. He was identified as a triggerman, yet his conduct after arrest told a different story. Surveillance video from the interrogation room showed him pacing, then climbing onto a table and attempting to force his way through the ceiling tiles in an effort to escape. The footage was preserved and shown to the jury. The same individual who fired a rifle into a vehicle on a man's birthday was recorded trying to crawl through the ceiling of a police station. That behavior reflected panic, not composure. His courtroom conduct raised further questions. During trial proceedings in a capital murder case, one of the defendants was observed laughing. There were outbursts serious enough that officers had to remove a defendant from the courtroom in handcuffs. In a trial where the death penalty was under consideration, that lack of restraint stood in stark contrast to the gravity of the charges. Then, on May 8, 2026, when the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts, Gathright broke down in tears in open court. A bailiff approached and escorted him out as cameras recorded the moment. The emotional collapse came after the verdict, not during the execution of the plan that led to it. Rashad Murphy, 32 years old and the oldest among them, displayed a different but equally revealing response. In the hours following the murder, he posted celebratory content on Instagram. One image depicted Tom Brady and Bill Belichick celebrating a Super Bowl victory, a post investigators interpreted as a coded reference to the killing. Another post read, "Hate me kindly." Detectives testified that they interpreted both uploads as celebratory references to Foolio's death. After his arrest, Rashad Murphy agreed to speak with investigators and initially denied ever being in Tampa. He maintained that claim until detectives confronted him with cell phone data and surveillance footage placing him in the city. As the evidence mounted, his account began to shift. Investigators noted that during the interview he even switched the hand he claimed to have used, a detail that drew attention because surveillance footage from the shooting showed a gunman firing with his left hand. Davion Murphy's interrogation raised additional concerns. Surveillance cameras inside the interview room recorded him mimicking the act of shooting, physically reenacting the motion of the crime while seated in a police station. That footage was preserved as part of the investigation. These actions did not reflect calculated restraint. Public celebration posts, contradictory statements under questioning, reenacting a homicide on camera, attempting to escape through a ceiling, and breaking down after a verdict are not indicators of discipline or preparation. They suggest individuals who adopted the appearance of a street persona without understanding the permanence of the consequences attached to it. No one embodied that contrast more clearly than Isaiah Chance. His mother testified that he was quiet, attended church, and struggled with speech development until the age of 4. He had once expressed interest in becoming a merchant mariner and building a life with direction. His own attorney argued that the legal definition of a documented gang member did not apply to him. When the trial was broadcast on court TV and viewers heard the penalty phase testimony, the emotional statements from family members, and the expressions of remorse, a substantial portion of the public began to recognize the disconnect between the image projected and the reality. These dudes are playing a role they borrowed from the environment they grew up in, not from anything they truly were at their core. The culture, music, was taught. And this is where we get to the part you came for. Because when the gavel comes down on a first-degree murder conviction in Florida, particularly one connected to a well-known rapper and a well-documented gang war that had been running for nearly a decade, the story doesn't end in the courtroom. The streets have their own appeals process, and they don't wait for a judge. When these men got transferred into the Florida Department of Corrections system, walking onto those blocks and getting processed, they weren't anonymous. They weren't strangers. The Foolio case was everywhere. Court TV live streamed it. It was trending on social media for weeks. The hip-hop world had been locked in on every single development. And inside those walls, information travels faster than you think. Inmates watch the news. Inmates have families on the outside feeding them information. And certain blocks in the Florida D.C. have deep connections to Jacksonville street politics. 6 Block is not a small, localized crew. The war between 6 Block and ATK are 12,000 spans years and has left dozens dead. When Foolio was alive, he was one of the most prominent figures in that conflict. Not just musically, but organizationally. His death didn't dissolve that network. If anything, music activated the people who survived him. So, when word spread that the men convicted of his murder were being processed into the system, fam, those blocks were already mapped out, already calculated. The welcome music that Foolio's killers received on their first day inside was not a coincidence. It was not random prison violence. It was coordinated in the same language that ATK and 12,000 used when they drove to Tampa with brass catches on their rifles. Consequences in the street world often follow a structured pattern. For Isaiah Chance, the reality was unavoidable. He helped facilitate a murder without pulling the trigger. He lacked the formal documentation that would even classify him as a hardened gang figure he appeared to portray. Yet he entered a Florida prison with his name and face broadcast across statewide news coverage, permanently tied to the killing of Foolio. He walked into a facility populated by individuals who either had direct connections to 6 Block, associates aligned with that side, or simply recognized exactly who the new arrivals were and what they had done inside those walls. There's a long-established code that predates all of them. That code does not separate the scout from the shooter. Conspiracy carries weight. Murder carries weight. Within that hierarchy, assisting in the setup of a birthday ambush is not viewed as a lesser role. On the first day, reputations matter, and notoriety can carry immediate consequences. Sean Gathright, 18 at the time of arrest and now 20, entered a system where public infamy has a short shelf life and swift repercussions. The Murphy brothers,